They can't tame us. Don't give 'em a reason to take us. Time is now, no time to wait up. Keep it raw, uncut, sit down, talk it down. Come together, we as bad, don't have to shoot it out. Keep it raw, uncut, sit down, talk it out.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Raw Uncut podcast. I'm your host, Rells. Make sure you guys like, follow, and subscribe on YouTube channel and on Twitch 2920 TV. Make sure you guys follow on X, formerly known as Twitter, which is also Mr. _ 2920. And I am joined with a special guest this week. Welcome in Dr. Jacqueline Bido. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you for having me. How are you?
No problem. I'm doing pretty good. We had a little bit of technical difficulty, so we had to restart this one over. So one thing I will say about my podcast, if we have some difficulties, I will tell you we did. So we about to restart this, and hopefully it'll get right this time. But once again, let's just start off with the beginnings again. Now, how was it growing up in the streets of Newark for you?
Growing up in the streets of Newark was just impactful. I grew up in what we would call the west sort of central ward of Newark and on Myrtle Avenue. And I grew up around stakeholder staple stores where people knew your name, they knew your family, just a host of culture surrounded me growing up. In the midst of sometimes just challenges, community challenges, what I would call them, where there were needs in our community. And so growing up, you saw the haves, the have-nots, and those who just were making it. But growing up, I just saw it all, and the culture that exists in Newark is beyond rich. And so it was always impactful being here and growing up. So wherever I go, I always make sure I tell people I'm from the fine city of Newark, New Jersey.
The fine city of Newark. The fine city. Well, I mean, listen, whatever place you grew up with is always going to impact you. Is either going to make you or break you. So you got to take what you learn from your environment and you have to apply it. So
Exactly.
now,
And then there are a lot of perceptions that come from it as well. And those perceptions, you have to be able to transcend those when you travel the world or you go into different opportunities, because sometimes people want to impose a perception about a place and they've never been. And so I always tell people, while Newark has its varied challenges, you have to come because you'll never experience what a wonderful house festival is like, or Afro Beats Fest in the midst of your town where your whole community comes together and has a good time. So I always challenge those perceptions about where I'm from.
what would you say probably is the biggest perception of Newark that people have told you?
One, that everybody is aggressive, and there's like nowhere where you can be safe. And that's just not true. While growing up, there were challenges. We've had experiences. I don't think that they're not things that can't be experienced in other cities, because I have experienced them in other cities or witnessed them in other cities. But there are places where you can flourish. In Newark, you got to see opportunity, and there's opportunity wherever we go.
So how important was education for you growing up?
Education was a non-negotiable in my house. We were a household where my father purchased an encyclopedia from a man selling books at the door, and he would tell me to go and select one of the letters when I was a young girl, and he would read to me different things from the encyclopedia. He would expose me to different historical moments in time, and this is a person who was an immigrant to the United States. And so between him and my mother, education was all you had. She always used to say, you have to get your education because it's the only thing they can't take away from you. And I lived by that. That's why you see I'm Dr. Jacqueline Bido, a doctorate of education.
Mhm. Yeah. So before we get into your doctorate, before we get into every other thing you accomplished, I also noticed and read in your bio that you were in the Navy. So what was your experience
Yes.
like being in the Navy?
My experience in the Navy was one that had ebbs and flows. I went to war twice, Iraqi freedom and enduring freedom. And it was an experience. I lived abroad in Naples, Italy. I got to see the world. And I ended up understanding what it's like to be resilient under fire, literally and figuratively.
How dangerous was that being in war though? Like, I can imagine that it was definitely quite an experience.
So, an experience on a ship is quite different than an experience on the ground.
Hmm.
Um, there were many times when we would have to go into general quarters. That's when the ship goes into emergency, just protective battle mode. And when you hear those alarms sound and they're yelling out what's happening, what somebody's seeing on the land or in our purview, you understand relatively quickly that life is short and it's about survival. And understanding that was like, this is why I live life to the fullest, because I've been in situations where my life could have been taken. And I always pay respects to those who did lose their lives in theater, on ships, due to different situations. But life on the ship was quite different. But you learned that the person next to you, you had to trust them because you were literally trusting them with your life to do what their job was, as well as me doing my job that I had in the military, which was information systems tech.
What was the biggest takeaway with being in the Navy? Like, what is the biggest life lesson you learned?
I learned how to be resilient in any situation. I learned how to pivot, have a game plan. If this isn't working, we have to do something else. Because in the military, it has to work or it's your life. And so being able to change and stop and do something on a dime, like not even process whether that may work fully, it just has to get you to the next moment.
So from there, from the Navy, what is your next step after the Navy?
So the next step after the Navy, after I came back the second time, it was like, okay, let me go into education because there's a war in our education system that I can battle just as I was battling a war on just protecting our environment and our safety as a person living in America. And so I went back and I taught at the very school that I graduated elementary school from, St. Rose of Lima on Orange Street in Newark, New Jersey. And I went back to teach. And I taught the fifth grade and I taught seventh and eighth. And my teacher who taught me how to read, Martha Richards, she was still there. And I went back and it was a full circle moment because what she had taught me stayed with me. And here I was, now an adult, coming back to impart the lessons that I learned from her onto others.
Just giving back to the community, very important.
Absolutely.
So how do you adjust? Because I have family in the military as well, and I can't imagine that the adjustment from being on the ship, being in battle, and then having to come back home and I guess kind of have a regular life. How was it? Was it an adjustment? Like, was it a tough adjustment to kind of like put yourself back into civilian life?
It was an adjustment that oftentimes I don't share with people, but I'll share with you here because I think it's an important statement that needs to be said, especially with the climate of the world. Um, when I first came back from my second deployment, I had missed a majority of the holidays that I would have spent with my family. And when I came back, that whole following year, having those then holidays come full circle back and not being present the year before was difficult at times because people would be talking about what happened last year. And I was like, oh, yeah, I wasn't here for that one. Oh, yeah, I wasn't here for that one. The other adjustment period was when I immediately came back. It was a humbling moment, but very, I had to reflect on it. When I came back, everybody, no matter what I had just went through, people's lives went on. There was no there was no conscious understanding of the plight of what somebody is going through in deployment when they can't make phone calls, when you don't know if your loved ones are okay. I saw my what we call shipmates, the people that I work with, lose their families, have divorce papers sent to them while they were in deployment. Like just the level of trauma that can happen on top of just being in a imminent danger area. The trauma that then happens to families, to people, to individuals based on loneliness. PTSD is real. There are people very close to me that experienced it. And so I say to people, like, when you have a family member in deployment, understand what that is like coming back, because that we have been isolated to routine and to living as if the next moment could be your last moment. And so your routine is very different. And so you normalize waking up, being in battle rattle, which is a full military armor, protective armor, and going to get your weapons, carrying your weapons at all time. Those things that just are not common everyday things when you come back home. And so always being conscious that the impacts of war, PTSD are real, and reach out to those people. They still need you. Even though they hold a wonderful face in public, they smile, they wave, they do all those things, and then they go home to, or they very isolate those pains that are coming from within, from those memories they have of the trauma they experienced in theater.
So, you being a person in the service, I want to ask you this question: how important is it when you do come home to have regular civilian life? How important do you feel like it is for a person in combat to have, to like sit and talk to somebody, like in terms of like a therapist?
I think it's important, and I think it's necessary, especially if you feel the trauma of your service. Like there are people that maybe are very aware of what the impacts were. And then there are other people that just the sound of a firecracker, just the sound of a weapon, like it took time for me to even purchase a gun because of what I experienced when I was in the military. Just the constant normalcy of having a weapon on you, a weapon around you. It took its toll. And so once I transitioned to a gun owner, it was understanding the safety of this is different when you're in a civilian setting versus what it's like in combat. Like it's really understanding, like, it's okay, no one's going to come and get you right now. Like it's really understanding those emotions concretely. But definitely I recommend that people speak to someone. Really and if they can't speak to someone, that they journal about it. Because sometimes you just gotta write it out and really just get it off of your chest. Because unless somebody was in the military, unless they understood what you went through, it's very difficult. Some family is not are not going to understand. They're going to want to rush you getting over it. And sometimes you never get over it. Sometimes you can't get over fearing your life.
Especially, I feel like I can't speak for it, but I feel like it's almost the same too. Like if you come back to the hood that you came from, it's almost like you feel like you're still on constant defense mode. So it's like you really don't get a chance to actually like take a breath and be able to just live a normal life, because you probably still feel like at some point your life is still in danger in one way or another.
Correct. And that's a reality. Like, I would say I grew up in a hood, but I don't really, I do not prescribe to certain things anymore because I have to be able to shift the mindset about what that is. There is a reality about the hood. That's a fact. But there are choices we make as individuals, even living in the hood, that hood doesn't mean uncivilized. And there's a certain civility that still can exist, even when hood is really a connotation for poverty.
Hmm.
Like we are in poverty, but because I'm in poverty doesn't mean I have to be ignorant. Doesn't mean I have to slight another. Doesn't mean I have to harm my brother or my sister. It's we're in poverty, and really understanding how do we address the needs of poverty, social emotional trauma that exists just because we're all trying to survive, and what survival looks like from one to another is different. But we have to make sure like that we don't ground that in because I live in the hood, I gotta be ignorant.
Hmm. Hmm. So how rewarding does it feel? Well, how rewarding at the time did it feel to come back home and to be able to teach in the community you grew up in?
It was super rewarding. I wanted my students, I almost got emotional. I wanted my people to see that an educated Latina existed from the same neighborhood you grew up in. That this same person that grew up in different scenarios, different experiences, different traumas, still could come back and serve my community, and you can make it. I wanted them to see, look, she looks like me, she looks like us. Now my opportunities have taken me to different states to have to reside different places, but wherever somebody says, where are you from, I always say I'm from Newark. It's always, this is, will always be home no matter where my impact or my opportunities take me. And so coming back to teach was like I had to. It wasn't even a question because I wanted people to see a Latina that grew up in Newark, New Jersey in a one bedroom apartment could really come out and be the person that God called me to be.
Mm. So what pushed you to then go ahead and pursue education to a point where you felt like you wanted to get your doctorate degree?
So two things led to that. One, I was working for a company and I needed a solidified bachelor's. I was in my last course for my bachelor's. And they said, even with all of my military experience, having led divisions, things like that it was not enough to apply for a supervisor position because
Mm.
I did not have a solidified bachelor's degree. And at that point, I said, there will never be another credential that will stop me from having an opportunity to apply for a position because I felt like I was slighted out of an opportunity that I was overqualified for, which is nothing new being a woman of color. But at the end of the day, I was overqualified despite a requirement. So this is why sometimes when I coach different companies or consult them, there has to be lived experiences or even the qualification of other experiences in order to get you to be hired for positions that you are qualified for. Because if I leave it at just the fact that you graduated from somewhere or you have a credential, as let's say a bachelor's, and I love all of my degrees, they were a necessity to me. I don't think it should disqualify somebody who has a proven track record. And so that was one reason that led to a doctorate degree. But above all, my grandmothers, one is an immigrant of the Dominican Republic. She is the reason why I live in America because she brought my father over, her children over, and my grandmother, who was raised in Puerto Rico and then came to the United States. Those two women's educational opportunities, when I asked them, both of them laughed. When I said, "Oh, how was school? Like, tell me what grade did you go to? Did you go to college?" They both laughed at me and they said, "College?" She was like, "I only went to the third grade." And my other grandmother says she only went to the sixth grade. So when I heard that from them, and they were both ended up being homeowners, ended up surviving, worked in factories, getting paid 10 cents a garment, like sweeping bathrooms, floors, whatever that job was, they did. And when I think about the fact that they only went to the third grade, not knowing English, not knowing anything, being foreign to this country, and they made it, there wasn't an excuse I could tell myself not to aspire for the greatest academic attainment of a doctorate degree based on American standards. And so that's why I'm Dr. Jacqueline Bido, because of my family, because of my grandmothers, first in my family on both sides.
I can imagine the pride and sense they had knowing that you achieved so much and did what you had to do, and using them as inspirations to achieve your highest level of success.
Yes,
So
they're very proud, and most of all, I'm proud of them. It's not easy having to leave your children for 3 years in Dominican Republic, and then travel without them. Trust a neighbor, a godmother, or somebody for their care until you can properly bring them over or bring them over. And back then, it wasn't all of the climate it is now with immigration. But what would this world be without immigrants?
yeah, that's a whole nother story. But you are absolutely right. Um, so what is Beatoism?
Beatoism, at its core, is it's a believe in myself, a believe in yourself. A philosophy that then transcended for my company is like a strategy for peace of mind. Because I always said that if somebody would just have a game plan, a next step that they could take in the midst of their storm, it would get them the motivation they needed to just move forward, keep elevating, keep just accomplishing in the midst of it all. And so Vetoism is me wanting to see everybody win. So if I can help, I'm going to pour into that person whatever my resources are. And I always use a hashtag that everybody always just smiles when I do it. It's the whole team is winning, because I feel like when my friends win, it's a win for me. I applaud that because I know what it took for them to get there.
It's a great concept. So now I have a question. The person versus the process, black and blue. What is that about?
Okay, so there's two different books I've authored, actually three. So the person versus the process I wrote, it was my first book, and I wrote that to decrease toxic leadership in work environments, because I found that there are a lot of traumatic leadership in places of authority, or places of decision making, that can traumatize a work environment. And instead of quickly firing people, or allowing nepotism without qualifications drive a culture, that there should be an understanding of when there is a challenge within meeting a goal, it's either the person or the process. And when it's the process, we make adjustments in the process. We look at what it really takes to get to the end result. But if it's the person, there is an empowerment that has to happen, a training, a professional development, because there are a lot of assumptions about, can you do a job? Can you be successful? And when you're under the right leadership, they can propel you to the next level. They can make you everything you've been called to be, as long as you take on that guidance. because you have to be willing to receive. But when they're negative, when that person is jealous in leadership, wants to compete with people in leadership, that competition ends up harming people. It causes stress at the workplace, things that ultimately people then leave scarred from toxic leadership. So my hopes for that book is that people learn how to properly lead and understand how to fix their culture without harming people that are there to work. And then Black and Blue, how ambitious women transition from abusive relationships to find self-love. It's a book that really speaks to my fellow alpha women. I think it speaks to women with goals, because when you are in a toxic relationship, it's hard for you to flourish, no matter how much you love someone. And when you experience trauma or abuse in your relationships, you really have to be reflective about who you are, who you were, and who you want to be as a woman first, despite the fact that you may have children, despite the fact that you may have been with this person a long time, despite the fact that you saw abuse growing up. I want women to read this book and know that you can survive, you can transcend, and don't let anybody hate on your dreams or keep you stagnant just for love. Love yourself.
Mm, that was deep. I'm not even gonna lie, that was deep. So okay, I'm gonna ask you a question because I did a little research on you.
All right.
How important is goals? Because I see that you wrote in 2016 you set a list of goals for yourself. How important was you for you to keep those goals to become the person that you are at this point 9 years later and beyond?
Goals are imperative for me specifically because I'm a spontaneous soul. Like I'm a free spirit. I like living, but there's a an importance about writing your goals down. So you put a placeholder on your wants, on some of your needs. Those placeholders allow you to measure whether you're moving in this direction, making conscious choices to move in those directions. Because every goal you place, there's one step you're supposed to do a day to get closer to meeting that goal. So whether you go every day and look at those goals and say, did I do everything I could do to move this forward? The answer is yes or no. And then a year from now, 6 months, whatever time frame you want to come back and look at them, they will remind you of what you told yourself you would do. That goals list wasn't for me to say, look, everyone, look at what I accomplished. That was to show people that everything you see in me, about me, I worked and it took time. Nobody gave me those things. It didn't happen overnight. And I think we are in a very dangerous mindset about overnight success. Consistency will get you there. I don't know when, but I do know it will. And so that goal for having my doctorate degree, I even timestamped that 2020. Bought my first house. I wrote that in 2016. Bought my first house 2021. Like, it took time. It took proper decision making, and it took some bad decision making and recovering from my bad decision making. Because it will happen. You won't get it right all the time. And that's okay. It's okay not to get it right all the time. What's not okay is to give up.
So I have to ask you. So I'm going to ask you
But
two
I'm
questions
glad you
before we.
found those goals.
Yeah, yeah, because that was one of the first things I noticed when I was doing my little research on you. I'm like, okay, she set goals, and it seems like she achieved about most of them. I was like, I wanted to get her input and see how it is. Like, what does she feel like? Okay, so now let me branch off of that. What do you still feel like there's left for you to accomplish?
Well, now my goals, because I have 2025 goals now. My goals are even more minute. They became more concise. So
Mhm.
where you see a list of like 20 things, now I made them more concise. And one of the major things that I am transitioning, and not even transition, this is who I am all my life, but really being conscious of my paying it forward and my impact to the community. Like I have on my goals list now 7 communities, one in Egypt, one in Africa, one in the United States. Like I'm picking places where I need to just make something happen. And so I've already connected with some folks on making those community service projects happen. I want to solidify land and a legacy for my children where they understand the importance of having a portfolio, a diversified portfolio, understanding that they need their own business no matter what career field they're in. They must brand themselves. And so, really looking at spending quality time with genuine, authentic souls that surround me right now. I appreciate my my network of people that pour into me, my family, because without a shadow of a doubt, authenticity is at the top of my goals list where everything I do has to be authentic in nature and come from my heart and what I've been called to do by God.
Okay, so I want to thank you for this interview. I appreciate it so much. It was very nice chatting with you. But I want to ask you one last question that I ask everybody before I close out. What would you tell yourself now? What would you tell your younger self now that you've been through so much? What advice would you give to your younger self?
Eradicate doubt at an early age. Everything that you have been called to do is possible, and invest in Google.
Google does help. Trust me, it does. It really does.
Listen. And above all, love. I would say, no, seriously though, find God early. Find God early. When you get that relationship, that personal relationship with God, I'm not talking about the one that comes from indoctrination. I'm coming about the one that where you hear and you are guided by God's divine calling for your life. I would tell my younger self, and I would say at 18, find God early.
Thank you for this interview. I appreciate it. If anybody wanted to get in contact with you, where would they be able to find you?
I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. You can, but definitely when you're about business, I'll tell anybody create your LinkedIn. Find me on LinkedIn, and you'll find me anytime where there's somebody needing support. So there are a lot of community events happening throughout the city of Newark you could get involved in. Just reach out to organizations. Shout out to Newark Science and Sustainability Inc., founded by Tobias Fox. We are lifting up hydroponic farm, food access in local communities, and really lifting up urban farmers through the Newark Community Food System. Tap into your gifts and always find a way to give back to your community.
Thank you very much. I appreciate this interview once again. That This was a very enlightening interview, and I can't wait to put it out so everybody can hear your input. And I thank you once again.
Thank you.
No problem. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Likewise.
Keep it raw, uncut, sit down, talk it out, come together, we as men don't have to shoot it out.